reason that that list includes those spaces, in my opinion, is that the government recognizes that animals require our care, particularly those animals that we've decided to contain in our lives. So horses, cats, dogs, and zoo animals, as an example. So I think the inference was to make sure that the animals were taken care of, and that included the essential care of those animals in that essential services guideline. What I don't think that the Premier sort of thought about or inferred in Alberta, or indeed anywhere else, was the various operations that might occur at a stable. So beyond the basic essential care of the animal. I'm reasonably confident that the government and health officials did not anticipate or did not think to include specific reference to riding schools or trail riding facilities or other operations that might in fact occur at a stable. In fact, it's quite clear that with the directives that they don't want groups of people together, and the other challenges surrounding people being very close to each other, recreational instruction programming in all sports has been stopped. And in our view, that would include certainly riding schools, which I know in Alberta have stopped for all intents and purposes, I think as they have just about everywhere in the country. So that's an important reference that we kind of recognize in this notion of stables. So what constitutes essential care for the horse? That's a subject also that's subject to some interpretation, I suppose. Under the guidelines of the National Animal Act and other statutes that dictate how humans are supposed to look after animals, there's no reference to riding as being an essential part of the care of a horse. What is essential to the care of a horse is exercise, or at least movement of the animal, and we all know that as horse people, and I am one. That if you leave a horse sedentary long enough, it's going to colic. It might get laminitis or founder. And there are lots of other health issues that arise from an animal that's used to grazing and moving all the time in its natural habitat. Continue to provide or deliver that essential care that includes movement. So then we get to this whole debate about, well, can I ride my horse? When I get that call 100 times a day from individuals who are saying, I want to ride my horse. The question I always throw back to them is it essential for the animal's health? In most cases, I would argue that it's probably not, that it's more about the mental health of the rider, which again, I understand. I don't own horses today, but I certainly have in my life, and recognize the need for people to be with their horse and typically on their horse, and how much enjoyment and peace that brings to them. But the reality is at this moment in time, it's hard for any of us, I think, to rationally look at this environment and say, what's my primary concern? Is it for the health and welfare of the animal, or is it my own mental health? Knowing that the mental health of the rider is very important, but I have to say that again, it must take second seat to looking after the horse. So stable owners have this dilemma of sort of debating with their boarders about who should be considered an essential caregiver to the horse. We recognize that staff at the facility are certainly essential care. Somebody's got to muck, somebody's got to throw hay at them, somebody's got to make sure they got clean water, somebody's got to make sure they're not injured, and if they are, to call vets in and so on. And farriers might be required during this period of time to shoe or to trim. But beyond that, what constitutes essential care? And I'm not here to judge. We know that some owners would argue quite successfully that their presence with the horse is essential for the care of the animal. I had a call yesterday from a woman who had a horse that in fact did founder a few weeks ago and is now on the road to recovery, thankfully, but requires very real and very consistent attendance to be walked and hosed and medicated and a whole range of things that are part of the rehab program. And the facility, frankly, is not in a position to be able to provide that care. And so the owner of the horse is being allowed to attend their horse on the property under some direction and with a schedule that says you can be here between this hour and that hour, and you can do that 3 or 4 times a week or daily as required. But that's it. And you're going to sanitize yourself before you hit the gate on my property. You're going to sanitize every surface you touch while on my property. You're not to interact with me or my staff, and you'll do your horse in that period of time that I've given you and go home. And in my view, that would certainly be an essential service to the horse and essential care. I think too, boarders are struggling with this idea that they're angering their boarders when saying they don't want them there, they don't want them at farm, and I'm not here to judge that either, because I suspect that boarding facility managers are equally as concerned about their own families and their own health, the health of their staff. So facilitating boarders coming to the barn sort of opens up the idea or the possibility of the spread continuing or not dampening this curve that the government keeps talking about. And I understand that, because they too are anxious, like all of us, about what this is and what it's not. And as I've said so often, I mean, if everybody had spots with COVID-19, it'd be very easy for us to decide who we would allow to be near or around us. This is not the case. And scientists are still trying to sort out how it's spread and how long the stuff lasts on various surfaces, and I mean a whole range of science issues that are way beyond the scope of me, but nonetheless are confusing to people. And so I want to think about, so for the purposes of this discussion and insurance, if I insure the facility and we cover the care, custody, and control of non-owned horses as part of the commercial liability policy provided, again, that policy is not interrupted by COVID. It's not affected by COVID. Their coverage remains in force. We have not canceled a single policy, nor will we. We haven't had any claims, I'm touching wood very quickly here, during the COVID crisis related to those boarding places, but I suspect we might over time. But those boarding facilities are still insured, and they alone will make a determination, because they're the caregivers of the horse, what constitutes essential care for the horses to remain within the guidelines and the governance, or the government's government authorities, and their inclusion in that essential business list that's now been published and is being followed. When an insurance policy, an insurance policy will not respond, which is the question on the other side of this, is when somebody's breaking the law. So a restaurant in downtown Calgary that was told to stop serving food in-house, if they decided to open their doors and have people sitting at tables, and there was a claim that arose from that activity, their insurer most likely would say, you broke the law, we're not coming to that party. We're not going to defend you because you clearly broke the law that you should have known you were breaking when you opened the business. Same basic premise applies here. But I'm not aware of there being a law yet where facilities can't open or stay open when they're providing the essential care to horses that in fact is their legal responsibility to do. Now to coaches. Coaches are another thing that come up a lot. And I suspect there's a number of coaches here. In fact, let's looking at some of the names. I see some coach names here for sure. So let's talk about the coach that is operating as an independent, that's traveling from barn to barn, has students in a variety of barns. And some barns are open, some barns are closed. They've got students that want to get to their horses. They've got students that want to ride their horses. I go back to what I've just said about the essential care of the animal. The professional coach is the only one that can make a determination, in my opinion, to decide whether or not the horse has to be ridden to maintain its health and soundness and welfare, as compared to that lesson that might be truly a training hour or whatever it might be for the rider. This is not a time to be training a rider, frankly, or horses. This is about sustaining their health. It's not about trying to keep a top line on a horse, which is something that somebody said to me this morning, which infers that they're still trying to keep their animals show fit. And it makes me crazy. I don't mind saying that out loud. This is not the time to be trying to maintain that level of fitness, simply because, frankly, there are no horse shows or competitions to be working towards in the near future. We hope that there might be a season near the end of this season or the end of this summer in every part of the country, but even that we don't know. And hopefully sanctioning bodies like EC and the Alberta Equestrian Federation, when they're involved, are going to be looking with sort of an 8-week window between the time that the government has said it's okay to have those gatherings where a horse show might fit, to give a timeline of maybe 6 or 8 weeks before the first horse show exists, so that both rider and horse can leg up and be prepared to be safely competing, as compared to just showing up tomorrow. And after the horse has been off for a period of time, or the rider's been off for a period of time, and then potentially putting both horse and rider in some dangerous situation because they're not prepared for the competition that's before them. we don't want people to rush either, sort of when the light goes back on. And we're hoping the coaches take the position of that responsible, sort of professional view and say, look, Mike, you want to go to the horse show? You're not ready. You've been off for too long. We're going to miss this horse show, and recognize that that's a far better thing to tell me than it is to say, if you really work hard this week, you can achieve the same level of fitness and preparedness that you had in March. And we're going to go to the horse show because I want to do that. And it's just not appropriate. So that speaks to the coach element. There's undoubtedly going to be more questions about that, but that's really how I feel about the coach element. I know in Alberta, just yesterday, in fact, I was speaking with a certified coach who, in fact, had done what we suggest every coach does, where there are questions about what their activities can and should be. And they phoned the local health authority, explained what their intention was to go out to a barn to teach someone or to supervise a ride, was actually the frame that they had used, not to teach, but rather to simply supervise a ride to ensure the safety of both horse and rider. And the government official gave their blessing, in fact, gave it in writing to the coach to say, yes, as long as you're following social distancing guidelines, you're achieving all those things to, from a professional perspective, to maintain health and safety of the rider, and you're maintaining the health and welfare of the animal, then by all means go forward. And that to me just was an endorsement of what we've been saying since the get-go, that we have to look at the horse first at this particular moment in time. Moving forward for the next several weeks, I anticipate that there's still going to be lockdowns. We're still going to have to respect the wishes of the boarding place, who may be very anxious about allowing anybody on their property. We're not giving any sort of a carte blanche to people teaching riding or receiving riding lessons, because again, I don't think this is the time for that. This is about looking after the horse in these very difficult times, making sure the facilities are able to do the job they need to do to maintain the health of the animals. And then we'll all come out of this at the other end. I would also argue, and those on the phone who are of a certain age might agree or disagree, but certainly there's lots of horses that I've known in my life that frankly are probably quite happy to have a break. Horses forget sometimes how to be horses, like some of the horses I used to own when I was horse showing, because we keep them at that heightened level of competition and focus. And they kind of forget how to be a horse and just hang out in the paddock and be with their pals. It's not the worst thing mentally for a horse to be let down from time to time. It's certainly from a mortality standpoint, mortality insurer and medical insurer, we see benefit in that. Like any athlete, going through cycles of being fit and unfit is not the worst thing, as compared to a heightened sense of fitness being maintained all the time. So that's kind of my view on that. I'm just looking at my notes real quick to see if I've got something else here. One of the questions that's on the handout, and this is actually a pretty good one, comes up occasionally. Does essential staff and other people include veterinarians, farriers, and others assisting with rehab exercises? Well, I've kind of addressed that, but the answer is, of course, vets and farriers are necessary caregivers to the animal that have professions that are designed for that purpose. And for facilities looking after horses, I would hope that they're allowing those professionals to attend. Am I legally liable if someone contracts COVID-19 while on my property? That's a tough one. I'm not a lawyer, and I actually say that in the thing, that a lawyer is the best person to ask that question. I have a personal opinion about that, but I'm not going to share it here. I think it would be very difficult to prove. I will say that, but suffice to say that the liability associated with what will happen with COVID-19 is frankly a global concern. It's not limited to the horse industry by any stretch. There are lots of insurers that are concerned about claims that might come forward over time, where premises owners, whether they be restaurants or businesses like mine, who allow the general public to attend, did I do everything reasonable as a landowner, as a premises owner, as a premises manager, to ensure that when you arrived as my customer, that the place was clean? Did I give you the opportunity to sanitize your hands? Did I sanitize services before and after you came in a situation, or excuse me, in a circumstance that was reasonable? In other words, did I take care of you as a person visiting my property, as I am required to do in law? And that's an important element as well for boarding places. I think border facility managers have to look at that as well and say, I can treat COVID-19 in exactly the same way that I treat any other risk that exists on my property. As a landowner, I have the responsibility to ensure the safety of people that enter my premises. And I alone will decide how much of that risk I'm prepared to assume. It's the same risk. It's not the same risk, but it's the same notion that says when there's snow coming off the arena roof in March, I shouldn't be allowing people to have riding lessons, or I shouldn't allow people riding in the arena. If there's an ice storm and the parking lot's full of ice, I shouldn't be inviting people to my premises knowing that that's a hazard that does exist on my property. The same basic premise applies here. COVID-19 is all around us. We don't know where it is. We don't know how we're contracting it in many cases. We don't know where we're contracting it in many cases. So the landowner certainly has the right to say, I'm prepared to accept some risk in a control environment that I feel comfortable with, or not. And that is their right. So,
Mike, I think what we'll do now is kind of put it over the floor to have people ask some questions.
okay.
So if everyone would like to just ensure if they have their chat window open. So again, for those on digital video, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a menu bar and you can click chat. I'm also going to be putting out Mike's document as well for screen share, so you will be seeing a change of scenery here in a moment. So please begin asking your questions now, and we'll have Mike touch on those questions here.
And while the first question is coming up, I want to say one last thing, and I apologize if I was rambling, guys. It's just how it is. That's just how I am. The best place to get guidance on what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do clearly is government and health authorities. It's very specific to Alberta, where you folks all live, and it might be slightly different than your neighbors in Saskatchewan. It might be slightly different from your neighbors in BC, but you're required to follow those local government and health authority guidelines, and that's the expectation of the insurance providers in the marketplace. Equestrian Canada's put up a couple of links. AEF put up a bunch of links. There's horse welfare guidance on those websites. There's a lot of the same information and other resources on those websites, and I strongly urge you to look over those things, because frankly, everybody's in this together, and the federations and we as risk insurers, insurance managers rather, across the country have a vested interest in everybody staying safe. So.
Also, if anyone wants to ask a question and you would like to be unmuted, also in the participant place, you can raise your hand. There's a little hand icon that says raise hand. If you want to select that, we will see that you have a question and we can temporarily unmute you. So you may address your question to Mike. Otherwise, you can still type your question in the chat function.
Okay, so Erin, are you going to read the question to me? Is how it's going to go? Okay.
Yeah, so our first question is from Janice. She says, if there are only 5 boarders and we work out time to go see the horses and the owner agrees, can this be done?
Well, yeah, and I kind of addressed that. I think that the boarding place manager has ultimate authority over who can and cannot visit the property, the timing of those visits. We expect them. I think everyone expects them. I shouldn't say we, but everyone expects them to follow the guidance, the social distancing guidance that's been very clearly made to all of us as citizens of Canada. And I think that that's completely acceptable. Again, we want the horses to be taken care of. And if that means allowing boarders to come and do the things they need to do with their horse to keep it healthy and sound, then that's fine. What I don't want to see, and I don't think any of us want to see, is just the sort of the, I don't want to call it frivolous, because I know how important the relationship is between people and their horses, but at this particular time, some pent-up demand to go and brush your horse or give it a carrot it's frivolous, and it shouldn't be encouraged. That's just my opinion. So.
The next question we had was from Elaine, who asked, what did Jason Kenney say that was different from the other premiers? I can also get her to elaborate a little if you'd like.
Yeah, no, yeah, you can ask her to elaborate, but I think if I get the question, he didn't really say anything different. Premier Horgan in BC, Premier Ford here in Ontario, the Premier in Nova Scotia, whose name I can't remember, I'm sorry, have all listed stables as essential services. If you go to the Alberta government website, you got to hunt for it a little bit, but there is a list of essential businesses that have been listed. And and you'll find stables as referenced in that list. So it's not different, really. There's no difference in Alberta than there is in these other provinces that have made a list. So unless there's an elaboration to that question, I think it's been answered.
Our third question is from Jen, and she says, could you please tell me more about the coach in Alberta who got a note to supervise a client? She has 2 clients of her own that she's been working with for several years that were both spooked, and they're finally getting to a point that they have more confidence now. So 1, if they have too much time off, they lose their confidence. 2, if their horses have too much time off, they have too much energy if they're not worked regularly, and could shake the client's confidence. So she just was wondering thoughts on how to best approach this. She wants to do it in the right way.
Yeah, fair enough. And again, it's kind of a loaded question. So I'm going to turn the question back to the coach and say, what's your opinion? I'm not the coach and I'm not the rider, and I don't know the horse well enough to be able to stipulate what is or isn't acceptable. I think what needs to be considered, though, as the professional is, again, back to what I said before, and that is what's essential for the health and welfare of the animal. I don't think the rider will suffer permanently if they don't have access to the animal all the time. I just don't. I know that the consequences of it as an athlete. I'm a marathon runner, and I know if I don't run for a month, I might as well have not run for the last year. I know how long it takes to get back in shape, and I get frustrated by it every time that happens to me because of injury or time or whatever. But ultimately, I get back to where I was, and I think coaches have a responsibility to have those sorts of candid discussions with their students, with their riders. Again, I want you to focus on the horse. Keep that as forefront in your mind, and then it'll be easier for you to decide. If that kid needs to be in the tack, for that horse to be ridden down a little bit, for it to come down off the fitness level it was a month ago, okay, I don't disagree with that. But again, I don't think we want to be encouraging coaches to keep the fitness level of horse or rider where it was a month ago, because I don't think that that's fair to the horse or the rider. I think it's far better to be looking at this as some sort of a downward swing in the horse's fitness, and then potentially an upward swing when the time comes. Feeding the horse appropriately and accordingly, knowing that we're going to lose some muscle tone, knowing that the horse might get a little fat, so managing diet and other supplements and other things that are going into the horse to maintain those things in a healthy environment. But it's up to the pro.
Our next question says, would you consider a horse trainer, not a coach, traveling to different barns a safe practice? And then it says different guidelines than coaches.
Again, I'm going to, without sounding too repetitive, I sort of have always taken the position that a trainer, and if I'm understanding the context, that you as a professional are clearly or are focusing more attention already on the horse than you are perhaps on the rider. So in some senses, you have a perspective that is, in fact, ahead of the curve. So again, I would say to you that if you are the essential caregiver for the horse to make sure that it remains healthy and sound, then I would have to agree that you're probably part of that essential staff for other people that go to the barn. But training right now, meaning to say I'm improving the skill sets of the animal as a trainer, I'm improving the skill sets of the rider as a coach or a coach trainer. Again, at this point in time, I'm not sure that that's doing anyone any favors. We know the extent of, or we know that the training a horse is not an easy task, and it requires some consistency, and it requires some continuity and methods that require attendance all the time. But again, I have to say these are extraordinary times, so I'm not sure that that we can't rely on habits that were there 2 months ago, I guess is what I'll say to you. Mm-hmm. If you're the essential caregiver and you feel it's essential for the horse's health and welfare, not his trainability, not where he's going to be in 6 months, but his health and welfare right now, if you're an essential caregiver in that capacity, then I would agree with you that you're no different than a coach.
I just want to jump back to the one question that we had from Jen about supervising clients and having too much time off in confidence. She just had a second part here.
Okay.
So it says, I would think that it's best for both clients and horses to keep up with 1 time a week work, even if it's less than the work we would normally put in each week. So yes, it would be less than what's normally done in a week, but it will be something primarily for the horse and secondary for the clients. Does that sound reasonable?
It does sound reasonable. I think that's a great approach. The other thing that I've heard coaches are doing, and I dare say probably some people on this call are doing the same thing, and that's just they're still maintaining the relationship with the rider. They're saying, look, Susie Q, the 15-year-old that's the aspiring, competitive rider for later in the season. I hope you're working out at home. I hope you're doing calisthenics and yoga and other things to keep flexible and fit yourself so that when we do get back to a regular routine, you're ready. Your horse may be in that sort of downswing right now where we just can't do the things that we would normally do to keep it fit, but we can sure as heck keep you fit. And by having that interaction and recognizing that that's part of the coach's responsibility, in my view, then frankly that helps. And are some of those services chargeable? Absolutely. As a consumer of coaches and a coach myself, I would say that those are absolutely justifiable to keep the process in play. This is not about coaches shutting themselves up in their houses. Some may choose to do that, and that's respectful. I respect that decision, but that's not necessarily a business way to do it. And by maintaining those relationships, you're probably farther ahead in the future.
Awesome. Okay, so our next question is from Donna. She says, what are your thoughts on trainers having training horses in at this time to be ridden by the trainer?
Well, again, if the trainer feels that that's in the best interest of the horse to maintain its health and welfare, then they should be ridden. But again, I want those trainers to step back from this and recognize that we're in a very different environment where the outcomes of those training practices now have some sort of far off distant timeline. And it may be that we don't have a horse show season by the end of the year. And it may be that some of the training board or training fees that are being charged have to be adjusted, knowing that those potentials or those outcomes that are being paid for might not be realized through no fault of the trainer. And to sort of evaluate how they can best serve their customers by training or maintaining the maintenance of the animal, maintaining the health and welfare of the horse as a part of their service, versus the teaching the animal specific skills, i.e. the training itself, and trying to evaluate and prioritize which is more important right now. I would argue that, again, the health and welfare is far more important and a saleable service than training the horse to do a pattern more efficiently, or a barrel horse more quickly to run pattern, whatever it is, or a jumper to jump higher. Any of those things that trainers do, I think those have to somehow take sort of a backseat right now. That's my opinion.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. We're just down to the last 5 minutes. So we'll wrap up the questions that we currently have in the chat option. Just
look how many there are, though.
So again, I'll just say, if anyone is calling in today by phone and did not have access to a screen, again, you can reach out to me at marketing@albertaequestrian.com if you would like a copy of the document we were reviewing today. As well, Mike has his equine email that you can contact, and it will go directly to him. That will be on the document, which is equine@CapriCMW.ca. So that's CapriCMW.ca. So just for the wrap up there, and we'll continue on until the end of the last few questions.
Okay, our next question is from Elaine. She says she has 35 head of horses for farrier, and regularly the clients are required to hold their horses when they're boarded. Now they have 2 farriers that do them in 1 day, and she's wondering if she should just charge and hold the client's horses.
I'm sorry, whether she should charge?
Yeah, like I'm guessing she wasn't intentionally meaning a handling fee of some sort.
I got nothing on that. I don't know. I'm not even going to go there. I think any professional now, including me, we have to evaluate what we're doing for our customers and adapting to the circumstances. I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the need to get an answer, but I'm not sure I'm the one to give it. I think the fact that a boarder can't be there, does that justify adding a fee? Again, that's a judgment call, I think.
Okay. Is there any other questions that people wanted to have answered? Just remembering you can type them in or you can raise your hand on the chat function there. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. Give it a minute here.
All right, so it looks like we have one last question from Donna here. At this time, would it be safe to decrease coverage?
Gosh, so, okay, from full lesson program to border type operation. So here's what I'll say to you, Donna, and I said this to a number of my own customers or CapriCMW clients in the last several weeks. All of us are prepared to answer the question, or sort of to help clients evaluate the coverages they have in place now, how the interruptions affected them, what it looks like coming out the other end, whenever that end is, and what the cost differentials are in the middle. I'm a little hesitant to say that it's okay to reduce coverage. Here's what I've said to some other customers, and I'm just going to use a generic example, but it might fit here. A barn that does a whole bunch of different operations, including riding school and boarding place. They say, well, I haven't had instruction revenue for 4 weeks now. It might be another 8 weeks before I get that revenue back. My policy was put in place in kind of January. We'll say January just for the sake of argument. And I want to take the riding instruction off my policy until we get out of this hole. Here's what I've said to those customers. We're happy to do the math, and we can certainly help you make a determination whether or not there's any real value in doing that. I don't want people to start canceling their policies, and it's not being self-serving, I assure you. It's about recognizing that facilities have commercial operations that are insured by very specific policies designed for them at their facility. So the ownership of land and buildings, the ownership potentially or use or of horses used for commercial purposes, and then the operations that go along with that, the boarders themselves, the boarding care, custody and control, the riding instruction, training instruction, whatever it might be, training revenue. To take out a small piece of it is unlikely to generate the huge credit that most people are looking for. They're looking for some relief, and I recognize that. But it's a challenge to try and find value in doing that. I did one for somebody this morning. I gave them the number, and it wasn't worth it. The policy had already been in place actually since January. Here we are now, it's April. So between January and April, the insurer would argue that the exposure existed. Therefore, we obviously want our premium for that exposure while that exposure was there. We don't know at the other end of this same term that will expire January 2021, how much of instruction might then be required in the fall. Let's assume we get back to business in the fall. So now we're talking about this middle chunk. So how do we evaluate how much that exposure is worth? So if we take the riding instruction out completely, we can tell you what the riding instruction premium was annually as it contributed to the total premium. Then we add back in the 4 months that already existed from January to April. And then we say you're no longer covered for riding instruction. When riding instruction gets added back in, you very well might pay a premium on the premium, as it were, to have the riding instruction added back in, because you're canceling a policy midterm or a part of the policy midterm. So the insurance company takes a short rate cancellation. And when you add it back in, you're getting it back in on a prorated calculation. Doesn't sound like much, and the math gets very nuanced, but it's not always mathematically beneficial to take those coverages out. Unless you're getting out of riding instruction altogether, my recommendation has been, to date at least, keep it. Now, some people are saying that they'll take the $50, they'll take the $40, they need the dough. We're here to serve, and we will follow that direction.
Excellent. It doesn't appear to be that there's any other questions at this time. So Megan, I'll let you wrap up.
All right, perfect. All right, well, thank you, Mike, so much for coming on our first community engagement session. We do have a few more coming up as well. So again, this document that is on the screen will be going to everyone who's in the meeting today via email, by the email that you had registered with. And again, for those who are by phone, those email addresses, me at marketing@albertaequestrian.com and Erin for coaching@albertaequestrian.com for any coach certification questions. Reach out to Erin directly. And then also to Mike, which would be equine@CapriCMW.ca. So again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're really happy we get to utilize this kind of platform, especially in this unique situation. So again, we're really happy for you to join us. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the provided email addresses.
And just a side note to mention to you guys, we do have 2 additional sessions like this booked for coming up on April 14th and April 16th. So if you do have questions between now and then, this kind of stimulated your brain and got you thinking, please feel free to join us again on another session. All of these sessions are free of charge. It's something that we're doing to help support you guys. So definitely feel free to join us, or like we said, reach out to Mike on that Capri email there as well. And we'll have some additional community engagement sessions coming up also with some other presenters as well. So definitely follow along on our calendar because we're trying to give you guys as much support as we can.
So can I just add one more thing, Aaron, for everybody, and I really mean this quite sincerely, that I want everybody to stay safe and hope that their families are all healthy and well through this Easter time and for the coming months. And on a lighter note, it was announced yesterday here in Ontario, and I suspect the Premier Kenny will do it as well in due course, when they were reviewing the essential list of service providers that are out in the community. There was actually a formal declaration made that the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy shall be considered essential service providers. So anybody with children can assure them that even though the COVID-19 is disrupting everybody's lives, that those 2 very important people in families' lives are considered essential services, and the government fully supports their continued work. So there you go. So listen, thanks very much for having us, having me on, Megan and Aaron, and we'll keep in touch.
Thanks very much, you guys. Enjoy.
Thank you.